The night my father cleared his throat and told me I had 1 month to leave, the roast chicken smelled like every Sunday of my childhood, but the words tasted like metal. My fork slipped, my sister's smirks flashed, and my mother kept skating peas across her plate, as if she hadn't watched the floor drop out from under me. They thought they were pushing me toward the door. What they didn't know was that the lock had already turned in my favor. I was not the stray they were evicting. I was the ghost author of the deed. I remember staring at my father across the table, counting the little blue veins in his temple to steady my breathing, while he spoke about new owners who would deal with me. My mother refused to meet my eyes, and that refusal said more than any speech. Sarah and Emma picked at their food between fits of private laughter, as if cruelty were a game of charades we all understood. I made myself small, let my voice break, let my hands tremble. It was a costume that cost me nothing and bought me time. When the plate squeaked into the sink and the house fell into the hush of evening, I went upstairs, closed my bedroom door, buried my face in the pillow, and laughed until the pillow tasted like salt. They had sold the house. They had not bothered to tell me. They did not know who had bought it. The idea had sparked weeks earlier on a screen that still flickered from too many late nights. I had been scrolling through listings the way some people scroll through the past half in longing, half in habit, when my childhood home appeared with its carefully staged photos and too bright lighting. They had photographed my room with my posters still on the wall and the thrifted bookshelf I'd repaired with wood glue. The listing jolted me with the familiar cocktail of invisibility and rage, and then the rage sharpened into something cleaner. I called Jake the only person who knew all my fault lines and the bridges I'd built over them. He understood at once we would buy it through the company in quiet with professional discretion and let the signatures carry the weight I didn't need to display. He called it reckless brilliance. I called it set dressing for the justice scene. If you had seen our family from the sidewalk, you would have believed we were a church brochure. White trim, winter lights, a lawn that made neighbors nod. Inside the house spoke other languages. Favoritism was policy. Silence was compliance. At 16, Sarah twirled under rented party lights while my father filmed her on a new device. 5 years earlier, my birthday cake had been a supermarket rectangle with thin blue letters and no candles. When Sarah turned 18, keys to a secondhand car jingled across the kitchen. When I graduated high school, a crisp 20 slid across the table like a receipt. Emma had her own ledger of indulgences, trips, and outfits in the casual vacuum of attention. When I asked for help with college, my father's answer was a shrug, hidden inside a lecture about priorities. The priority, it turned out, was never me. What they never understood was how their neglect hardened rather than hollowed me. I learned to code the way some people learn to pray quietly and every day. A pawn shop laptop with a missing key taught me that function mattered more than shine. In a sophomore class where the fluorescent lights hummed like bees, Jake slid into the empty seat beside me and read what I had written on the screen as if it were music. We started taking small jobs no one else wanted: inventory tools for boutiques, scheduling for offices, where the copier jammed and the receptionist cried on lunch breaks. The first time a client handed us cash and gratitude, I realized proof could be paper, but it could also be relief. We rented a windowless room that had once been something without a name and made it into something like a company. We slept at odd hours, ate what the vending machine gave us, and built a system that was bigger than our stamina. There were days when the code felt like a hydra, and nights when the monitor's glow was the only warmth. Then a logistics firm with too many moving parts asked to see our tool in action, and we rehearsed until we could explain it in our dreams. After the demo, there was quiet. After the quiet, there was an offer, $2,300,000 for what we had birthed on coffee and grit. I read the number twice then, a third time, because shock needs ritual. Jake laughed like someone who had run too far and found the ocean. I did not tell my parents. There is a kind of peace in keeping the most tender things unobserved. At dinner, my father lamented bills, my mother counted tuition for Sarah and Emma, and my sisters discussed phones and weekends. I chewed, nodded, cleaned my plate. When my mother cornered me after sophomore year and announced rent like a sentence $800 a month for the small room down the hall, I said fine and paid her before midnight. It was a transaction like any other, except this one bought me a perfectly balanced ledger in my heart. So when the listing appeared and the idea clicked into place, I felt ready. The agent we hired moved with the measured grace of someone who understood the price of secrecy. The paperwork unfurled across days with the patient finality of tides. While my family counted boxes and gossiped about escrow, I signed. While my father warned me at dinner about the new owners who would deal with me, I smiled into my glass of water. The night the sale closed, I walked through the rooms after everyone had gone to sleep and put my palms on the walls I had learned to lean against. The house hummed like a thing returned. The day my parents moved out was almost theatrical in its symmetry. Dad barked orders to the movers. Mom checked boxes with her usual tight-lipped smile. Sarah whined about her broken nail, and Emma recorded a farewell video for social media. I stood in the doorway, quiet, small, invisible, the role they had written for me years ago. Mom patted my arm, saying, "Well, Amber, this is it. You've got 1 month before the new owners arrive. Better start looking for an apartment." I nodded, masking the grin that threatened to surface. "Right. I'll figure something out," I said. Sarah giggled, tossing her hair. "Good luck affording anything decent." Emma chimed in. "Maybe she can live in her car if that rust bucket still starts." They all laughed. Dad clapped his hands and said, "All right, let's go." And just like that, they left, not even glancing back. When the last box disappeared into the truck, the house fell silent. A silence so pure, it was almost holy. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing against the bare floors, the air smelling faintly of dust and roast chicken. My heart was beating hard, not from sadness, but from freedom. I stood in the center of the living room, my living room, and whispered, "Welcome home." That night, Jake came over with pizza and beer. We sat on the floor, cross-legged, the documents spread between us like sacred relics. So he grinned, "Landlord or homeowner. Which title are we celebrating?" I lifted my bottle and smiled. Both. We clinked bottles, our laughter bouncing off the walls that were finally mine. For the first time in my life, I slept without fear of being told to leave. Mornings came easy. I filled the house with things that reflected the version of me they had never seen. Clean lines, warm, light, the scent of coffee and success. I bought soft couches. A gleaming espresso machine framed the company's first check on the wall. Every corner whispered, "You made it." My parents had wanted to erase me, but instead they had handed me the stage. 6 months passed in quiet triumph. My company flourished. Jake and I hired 2 programmers and expanded into new contracts. My life was peaceful, productive, almost serene, until one afternoon when my phone buzzed with a text that broke the calm. "Why are you still there?" I stared at the message, my lips curling into a slow smile. Of course. The neighbors must have mentioned that the girl they'd kicked out never left. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but instead of replying, I set the phone down. Let them come. 2 days later, a car pulled into the driveway. I watched from the window as they stepped out, Mom, Dad, Sarah, and Emma, dressed in expensive clothes, but wearing expressions of uncertainty. For once, they weren't the rulers of this space. They were visitors. I opened the door before they could knock. "Come in," I said, casually stepping aside. They walked in and froze. The living room was transformed, modern, elegant, filled with the warmth and taste they'd always claimed I lacked. Sarah's mouth fell open. "Oh my God, this place looks amazing." Emma whispered, "This must have cost a fortune." Dad frowned, suspicion creeping in. "Amber, how are you still here? Who owns this house?" Mom's voice rose sharp and trembling. "Where did you get the money for all this?" I sat down on the couch, crossing one leg over the other, and met their eyes one by one. I own it. My company bought the house. I'm not going anywhere. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Mom's face twisted. That's impossible. You don't have that kind of money. You're just a programmer scraping by. I smiled softly. Actually, I run a software company. We've done very well. I'm worth over $3 million now. The silence that followed was delicious. Dad's jaw slackened. Mom clutched a chair for balance. Sarah blinked rapidly, her confidence dissolving. Then Emma blurted out, "If you're rich, then you can help us. I need a new phone and Sarah's tuition." Dad cut her off sharply. "Emma, stop." He turned to me, forcing a brittle smile. "Amber, let's talk. We've had some financial issues. The new house is expensive and Sarah's college bills. Maybe you could help us out. We're still your family." I laughed short, bitter, and sharp enough to cut glass. "Family. Let me get this straight. You sold this house without telling me, left me behind, mocked me for not affording rent, and now that I'm successful, you show up asking for money." Mom's voice cracked. "We didn't know you had money then. If we had known. If you had known," I interrupted, leaning forward, "you would have used me. Just like you always did. Not because you loved me, but because you wanted what I could give." Dad's face hardened. "That's not true." I stood my pulse, calm and steady. "It is. You showed me every year. On birthdays, on holidays, every time you looked at Sarah and Emma like they were worth gold and looked at me like I was dust. You taught me exactly where I stood." Sarah's voice wavered. "Amber, we didn't mean—" I cut her off with a small smile. "You did. And it doesn't matter anymore. Because when you walked out of this house, you made your choice. Now I'm making mine. I don't owe you anything." Mom's eyes brimmed with tears. "Please, Amber, we're still your family. We love you." I pointed to the door. "Your love only appeared after the bank account did. Get out." They hesitated, stunned into silence. Then one by one, they turned and walked out. Mom was the last to leave, her face streaked with tears. "This isn't over," she whispered. I held her gaze steady. "Yes, it is. And if you keep showing up here, I'll get a restraining order." Then I shut the door and locked it. Leaning against it, I felt my chest rise and fall, not from anger, but release. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was earned. For the first time, I wasn't the forgotten daughter or the burden. I was the one with power. And God, it felt good. In the weeks that followed, the messages began. First, Dad's voice crackling through voicemail, thick with forced regret. "Amber, we made mistakes, but we're still family. Call us back." Then Mom's texts, long, desperate, filled with half apologies and emotional bait. "We didn't mean to hurt you. Things got complicated. Please just talk to us." Sarah sent photos of her crying in her dorm room, claiming she missed me. Emma was blunt as ever. "If you really have all that money, the least you can do is help with my tuition. You're rich now, don't be selfish." Each message was a reminder of who they still were, people who mistook love for leverage. I read them all one by one and didn't reply to a single one. For the first time in my life, silence was power. It didn't sting anymore. It healed. The house became my sanctuary. Mornings began with espresso hissing softly as sunlight spilled through clean glass. The air smelled of paper and ambition. I filled the rooms with books, art, and life, all the things I had once been told were too much or too expensive. I hired a gardener, refinished the floors, and turned my old childhood room into a small office. The same room where I'd once been told to pay rent now housed the company's future blueprints, contracts, prototypes. Every wall was a victory lap. Meanwhile, the business grew faster than Jake and I could keep up with. We hired more programmers, moved into a proper office, and found ourselves signing contracts that dwarfed the deal that started it all. One client in particular, a national logistics firm, signed a 2-year deal worth nearly $10 million. Jake called me that night, his voice practically shaking with disbelief. "Can you believe this?" 10 million, I smiled, leaning back in my chair. Believe it, I built it. Our days blurred into meetings, coffee, and deadlines, the kind of chaos that feels like flight, not fall. I was thriving, and for once my success didn't feel like rebellion. It felt like truth. Then one rainy afternoon, a knock at the door broke my rhythm. When I opened it, Aunt Linda stood there holding an umbrella and a soft expression that carried both warmth and worry. She had always been the quiet observer at family gatherings, kind neutral, the peacekeeper. I hadn't seen her since the day my parents moved out. "Amber," she said gently, stepping inside, "you look happy. The house looks beautiful." "Thank you," I said, motioning her toward the kitchen. I poured her tea, waiting for the question I knew was coming. She took a sip, sighed, and said, "They told me what happened. Your parents, your sisters. They're trying to make things right. Maybe you should at least talk to them." I smiled small and polite. "Aunt Linda, they didn't make a mistake. They made a choice. I'm just living with the consequences, so are they." Her eyes softened. "But they're still your family." I shook my head slowly. "They stopped being my family when they decided I wasn't worth keeping. Blood doesn't erase betrayal. It just stains it." She reached out, placing a hand over mine. "You sound strong, but don't let strength harden you so much that forgiveness becomes impossible." When she left, the house felt different, quieter somehow, but not lonely. I sat by the window watching raindrops race down the glass, the reflection of my own face superimposed over the storm outside. Aunt Linda's words echoed in my mind long after she was gone. Forgiveness, a word that once meant surrender, but now felt like a choice I could control. That night, I walked through the house, touching the walls like old memories. The kitchen where Mom had once ignored my birthdays. The hallway where Dad's voice had declared I was a burden. The staircase where Sarah and Emma had whispered jokes about my future homelessness. I could still feel the ghosts of it all, but they no longer had weight. They were just shadows of who I used to be. And as I walked into my office, my old room, I looked at the framed deed hanging above my desk. Amber Carter, owner. The name felt like closure. Not vengeance, not pride, just peace. Sitting at my desk, I opened my laptop and stared at the blinking cursor. For a long time, I did nothing. Then slowly, I began typing an email, not to my parents, not to my sisters, but to myself. "You did it. You survived them. You built what they never thought you could. You turned pain into purpose, rejection, into reward, silence into strength. You didn't win because you hurt them. You won because you no longer needed to." When I finished typing, I hit save and closed the screen. The rain outside had stopped. The house was quiet again, but this time the quiet wasn't an absence, it was fullness. Every scar had become a map. Every insult had become fuel. Every loss had become freedom. That night, I stood by the window, the moonlight washing the room in silver, and I realized the truth I had chased for years. Family isn't who you're born to. It's who doesn't sell your home out from under you. It's who stays when there's nothing left to gain. I didn't need to forgive them to move on. I just needed to live well, and I was doing that. I smiled, turned off the lights, and let the house settle around me, steady, strong, and finally mine. If you've ever been underestimated, forgotten, or told you'll never make it, let this be your reminder. Success doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just smiles quietly behind a locked door you own. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if this story moved you, and tell me in the comments what you would have done if you were Amber. Would you forgive, or would you walk away?